week 8 of spring quarter and the 8th lecture in our Plato Royalty Lecture Series, Greeners on the Cutting Edge. So these are lectures all by Evergreen graduates who are out there in the real world doing cool stuff on the cutting edge. And we are delighted this week to have here Lynda Weinman, co-founder and CEO?
No, executive chair.
Executive chair of lynda.com. So Lynda graduated from Evergreen in 1976, a memorable year, and she took lots of interesting stuff here at Evergreen, but not computer science. So here she is.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you for being here. Let's see if I can get the clicker worked before, so. That's interesting. What am I doing wrong? Okay, I'll use the arrow key. So I am going to talk about 4 things today. Oh, nothing. I see the computer's frozen. Oops. It's interesting. There we go. Let's see if this works now. Yes. Okay, the skills gap and the benefits of online versus the benefits of in-person education. Where does lynda.com fit into all of this? And the article that was assigned to this seminar, which is the Laptop U article. And in the end, we're going to end with my favorite part, the discussion part. So I just wanted to see a show of hands. How many of you are worried about graduating, whether you'll be employable and find your first job and all that kind of stuff? Oh, I'm surprised at how many of you are not. But I thought everyone's hand would go up, but I don't know, that only looked like about 50% of you, so kudos. There's obviously a very large conversation going on right now, national conversation about the so-called skills gap. So I wanted to look at this from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, I went onto Forbes and I wondered if you guys saw yourself here, if these are things that you're studying to be for these kinds of jobs and disciplines: software developer, market research analyst, training and development specialist, financial analyst, physical therapist, web developer, logistician, database administrator, event planner, interpreter, a petroleum engineer, or an information security analyst. Could I just also see a show of hands if you think you're on this list, what kind of career you're grooming yourself for? Okay, so maybe 5% of the hands in the room are going up. I wanted to point out that these 10 jobs didn't even exist 10 years ago. And I actually graduated from Evergreen 40 years ago, if you can believe that. So the point of showing those slides is that a lot of people are talking about what those hot jobs of 2014 are, and there will be different hot jobs in 2015 and different ones in 2016. And if you just chase the hot job, it's not going to work anyway because it'll be a different hot job a year from now. And the next thing that I looked up on Forbes was I wanted to know what they thought the top skills were, the top 10 skills. And so sense making is just making sense of things, social intelligence, how you interact with others, if you're able to have sort of ideas and be adaptive and flexible in your thinking, if you're aware of cross-cultural differences, if you're informed by data, if you have media skills, transdisciplinary, I thought that was a really great one for Evergreeners, a design mindset, cognitive load management, which just means, I looked up what that meant because I didn't know. It means that you're able to juggle lots of different technologies, like, time manage your email and your Facebook and all of the different sort of demands in your digital world, and virtual collaboration. And from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, there was this list, which is about verbal communication, working in a team structure, making decisions and problem solving, planning, organizing, and prioritizing work, processing information, analyzing data, your technical knowledge, that's only one little bit of it, and proficiency with computer stuff, and be able to read it, write and create reports, and the ability to sell or influence others. And I thought that I would just sort of put this vis-a-vis the expectations of an Evergreen graduate, and you can see that you actually are being groomed to have the exact right skills for going into industry, because it is more important that you actually learn how to learn, that you learn that what you put in is what you get out, that you learn how to communicate, how to sell your ideas, how to talk, you're doing a lot of seminar work, and that whatever it is that you settle on, career that you want to choose, it's a rather small part of what it is that's going to make you successful. And so I thought that I might just review a little bit the anatomy of my personal career, since I'm sort of being held up here as the exemplar of the successful Evergreen graduate. And I first wanted to start by saying that I had an incredibly tough childhood, and that I was, my parents separated, they didn't get along at all. I went to live with my grandparents. I was the oldest child. I had to take care of my 2 younger siblings. My grandparents didn't want us. We moved back in with my stepmother and my dad. They didn't want us. And I experienced just this tremendous abandonment when I was little. And so while I might have been good at school and really enjoyed kindergarten and first grade, by the time I got into middle school and high school, I was completely disenfranchised. I was totally in my own head. I was battling a lot of insecurities, a lot of grief over this abandonment, and I really wasn't able to focus. I don't think it would have quite mattered what school I went to or what kind of education it was, if it was online or offline, or what the pedagogy was. I was just needing to recover from childhood trauma, which I'm sure I'm not alone. There are lots of people who have to recover from that. When I was in high school, I read a book that changed my life, and it was $1.95. Do you love that? And it was a book that described this education system in England called Summerhill, and where they trusted the students to learn whatever they were interested in. And what they did was they provided classes that were engaging and really good teachers, but it was up to students. There were no prerequisites, there were no grades. It was sort of a free-form environment, and what they claimed was that students would come out of the system knowing what they wanted, knowing what their own interests and aptitudes were, and that it would create a self-motivated and engaged learner. And this just sounded really dreamy to me, because I was so disengaged, and it gave me hope that maybe if I were in this different educational system, maybe I could get out of my own away from my own internal demons, and be able to be a student, be able to actually learn things and feel good about myself. So I ended up going to an alternative high school in 8th grade that was very unstructured, actually less structured than Evergreen. It was a total hippie school. I basically, for the first 6 months while I was there, all I did was throw pots in the ceramics class, and I didn't go to school, and I just kept waiting for this thing to happen to me. When am I gonna find what it is that I love, and love learning and all this stuff, and it didn't quite happen. I attended a class that was a women's studies class, and I thought that at the time, this was probably in, 1972, 71, maybe even 70, that I thought that feminism was just sort of bra-burning, men-hating women, and that I wasn't one of them, and that, I wouldn't get anything out of this class. But upon reading some of the concepts around feminism, what I realized was that feminism was really just about the same thing that Summerhill was about, which was that you can be anything that you put your mind to, and that there's hope for everybody, that if you believe in yourself and you just overcome whatever obstacles are in your way, just sort of push through them, that any opportunity is yours for your own creation. I next went to Evergreen, and like I said, I was here, I graduated in 1976, so I was here from 73 to 76. And I was the shy person in seminar. I was the person who never said anything. If we went around the table and we had to even introduce ourselves, my heart would pound out of my chest. I was just a really shut down person. And for whatever reason that was, if it was my childhood, if it was my predisposition, my personality, it just was really hard for me to engage in group discussions, mostly because I was terrifically insecure. And I ended up studying history, philosophy. I had a one-year internship where I ran the art gallery. I worked directly with a dean. And then my last year I took a class called Women in Business, where I learned about becoming an entrepreneur. And the next 20 years that followed were this sort of very strange, windy path, and some failures, some successes, trying a bunch of different things. When I graduated from Evergreen, I thought I wanted to go into exhibit design because I had liked running the art gallery, but instead I got a job as a store manager. And then I talked my grandfather into loaning me money, and I started my own store when I was 23. And it went out in flames by the time I was 26. I'd lost all his money, and I thought I would never have any kind of opportunity like that ever again, that I'd totally blown it, that I was a total failure. I started to make my own clothes and sell them. That business kind of fizzled out. I had a boyfriend who was working in special effects at the time, and he had a camera service, and he taught me how to run his cameras, and I ended up being fairly good at that, and then teaching myself how to do a lot of things in the special effects industry, where I eventually became and learned animation, became an animation director and a camera operator. But it wasn't really that passion where I was able to do it, and I was able to earn money, and I was in a creative industry, but I felt like I didn't own it. It was something that I'd learned from my boyfriend, and it was just something that I'd been able to pick up, but it wasn't really my passion. And right around that time, he brought a computer home from being in Hong Kong, and it was an Apple II Plus clone. So it was a command line interface and DOS. It was running DOS, and none of you know what this is. But anyway, he was really annoyed with me that I wasn't excited. So to please him, I picked up the manual. I kind of taught myself how to use the computer. And just like the cameras, I was kind of good at picking it up. I just had this, sort of technical aptitude that I didn't know that I had. And as I started to teach myself things, I would get more and more excited. And at my job, I would say to people, oh, look at the form that I created, or look at the database I made, or look at the this, or look at the that. And for some reason, they would all come to me asking me questions. This was right around the time of the desktop publishing revolution, where I think a lot of what I would call mere mortals, like regular people, weren't thinking they would ever use computers when computers first came out. But then when the laser printer came out and people realized, oh, we can do design on the computer, and we can, instead of going to the typesetter, we can typeset our own stuff, and we can do our own graphics. Suddenly, that was kind of what they call the killer app, which made everybody want a computer. And because I'd already taught myself a lot of things, people were coming to me and asking me how to do different things on the computer. And I was mystified, like, why do they think that I know any more than they do? I'm only just sort of one step ahead of them. I've just taught this to myself, and then I'm explaining it to them. But what I realized was that I was actually a good teacher. It was something I did not know about myself. I did not realize that I had that talent. And I think if I look back to some of the things that Evergreen really values, that sort of last line on the list, the Forbes list of being able to sell an idea, sell yourself. The idea there was another list where it just talked about your ability to communicate, your ability to share ideas. That because that was something that I knew was valuable, it just sort of gave me the courage to be able to position myself as this computer consultant and teach other people. And I had a child when I was 33, and I couldn't work in the film industry anymore because they want you to work all kinds of crazy hours. They want you, if there's a shoot and you have to stay up 36 hours straight, then you don't really have a choice about your hours, and that was really hard with a small child. So I was invited to go into a class to give a lecture, kind of like this. My very first time, I had my daughter in a sling. I was nursing her in the hall in between giving the lecture. And I talked about some of the work that I had been doing on the computer. I had gotten this really great opportunity to work on Star Trek 4, and I had done animatics. I'm actually listed in the Wikipedia as the first person to do pre-visualization on a personal computer because I'd been hired to animate the storyboards for Star Trek 4, and I'd worked directly with William Shatner, and he was the director at the time, and it was this kind of big profile job that ended up getting me attention, and that was how I was invited to go speak to this class to talk about my work that I'd done on Star Trek. And all of the students really loved my talk, and the teacher called me after the lecture and said, you know, would you consider coming and teaching here? And so I feel like I didn't know I wanted to grow up and be a teacher. I didn't know that teaching was going to be that passion, that thing I'd been searching for all those pretty much 40 years of my life of trying to find what I was good at and what I liked. And the one thing that I knew, though, because of the book Summerhill and because of Evergreen, was I believed it was possible to find those things. And I think if you don't look for them, they won't happen. And so I see a lot of people who out in life who are just very defeated and don't believe that they can do anything other than what they think they're supposed to do. And part of what I got out of my Evergreen education was that belief that I could find something. And so it kind of came to me late in life. And I started teaching at Art Center College of Design, where I taught interactive media, motion graphics, and just general design on the computer. And while I was teaching there, I saw the internet for the first time. And it just maybe hit me way before it hit a lot of other people that artists were going to publish to the internet, that it wasn't only going to be a coding platform. And so I was looking at all my Art Center students who were learning graphic design and how to do brochures and business cards and collateral for their clients, and I realized that they were going to need to know how to do this on the web. So I went to a bookstore and I looked to assign a book on that topic, and there was no book on the topic. And so I actually decided in the bookstore that I should write the book because I knew how to research things, I knew how to teach myself, I had no idea how to do web design. But I believed in myself enough because I'd been teaching for a little while, I'd been writing curriculum, I'd written a couple of articles that I'd been invited to write in magazines, that I maybe had the right skill set to research the subject and write the book. And then what ended up happening was the book became a huge success, which happens, you know, it's like lightning strikes. It doesn't happen to very many people, their very first book. But it was translated into dozens of languages. It became the de facto book that was used in college and by lots and lots of people to teach themselves web design. And I think it was, the reason why it was so popular was because I had a certain teaching style that was very open and very approachable, and I tried to break things into the most simple pieces that I could, and my goal was to actually impart knowledge. It wasn't to lord my knowledge over other people. And a lot of the computer books that I read were slightly more intimidating and weren't really written in this sort of really approachable, nice fashion. So the book became very successful, and it gave me an experience that I had never had in my whole 40 years of working up until that point, which was royalty-based income, passive income, making something one time and getting paid for it many times. So the more popular this book became, the more money I got. And suddenly I had a windfall of money that I'd never had my whole working life. And with that money, we decided to buy our first house, my husband and I. And we moved outside of LA, and we thought I would just continue to write books, and he was an illustrator, and that he would just be able to do his illustration work with FedEx and modems and stuff. And I ended up really missing teaching. And so he had this idea that why don't we rent a classroom over spring break and see if anybody would come to take a web design class from you where we lived, where we bought our house, versus at the university. So we basically did this. It was a great experiment. Somebody came from Vienna, Austria to our first class, kind of blew our minds because it was the power of the internet, which was still really nascent. This was back in 1996. So we ended up starting a classroom, and eventually my classes were so popular, people were coming from all over the world to take classes in web design because it still wasn't taught at community college level. There was no online learning. There was really no other way except through my book or this class that we were teaching. And eventually we hired other teachers, and then I went to the book publisher and I said, well, I know I've been teaching web design, but I'd really like to write a book on Flash. They didn't think there was a market for it, so we just decided to make a video of it instead of writing a book. So the whole idea of doing videos was in response to the publisher not wanting me to write a book on that topic. And in 2002, a lot of things changed about our classroom business. There was a downturn in the economy, what we knew as the very first .com crash, which was where a lot of startups that were getting funding went out of business, and there was suddenly all of our customers stopped wanting to come to our physical classroom. And so as one idea, in addition to a lot of others, we were running a conference, we were writing books, we decided to put our lessons online, and we put about 20 classes online, charged $25 for it. The first month, 30 people signed up. The first year, 1,000 people signed up, and we just thought it was a huge failure. And it was just one of these things, many things that we were doing to stay afloat. So fast forward to today. Obviously, I hope you've all used lynda.com. It's a library that has hundreds of teachers who are contributing. They all earn passive income like I did. That was something that I borrowed from that experience. We have dozens of subjects, and we have millions of people who use lynda.com, including Evergreen, and a lot of universities. About 30% of universities in the United States have lynda.com licenses. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm standing here, is because lynda.com is this huge success. But I thought it was important to share with you that I didn't arrive at lynda.com the day I left Evergreen, that there were 20 years of just trying a lot of different things and having things work, not work, fail, and trying to figure it out. But I knew when I felt that incredible joy of being a teacher, and that people were learning from me, and that I had something special that I didn't see around me, that I'd found that calling that I'd been searching for. And I really think that I wish that for all of you. I think that's part of what we're led to believe by going to school here, and I think it's a good belief. It's certainly worked for me. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, but come back to lynda.com and some of our philosophy and pedagogy. And I wanted to, oh boy, did we freeze again? Let's see. Okay. So one of the things that the article Laptop U talked about, can I just see a show of hands of how many people read the article? Because I know not everybody could have. Okay. So about half of you again. So a Mooc is this online learning platform, which stands for Massive Online Open Classroom. Almost universally, the idea is that they're free, and that often they give credit. They have a start date, just like Evergreen, a duration, just like a class you might take at Evergreen. And the whole structure of it is modeled after a classroom environment or a school environment, to where you would get, it has an assessment component, you would get a grade, you might get a certificate of completion. And so, let's see, I have to use this now. And so some of the differentiators between what a Mooc does and what lynda.com does is, one, it's emulating, it's like the online version of going to school, and it often offers grades and certification or some kind of credentialing. And lynda.com is modeled after a library. So if you think about a class, you're all sitting in a class, you're all listening to me talk. I'm looking at your faces. Some of you are tuned out. Some of you are engaged. Some of you are thinking about your problems, just like I had problems when I was, younger, or whatever. I'm interesting or I'm not. In a library, it's much more self-directed, where every single person in this library is learning something different than somebody else, and they're going at a different speed. And they're also coming at it from this idea of abundance, that you might go into the shelf and pick out a book and then realize that there's one to the right or one to the left that also is relevant to what you're researching. You might read a paragraph of one, a chapter of another, a sentence of another. There's sort of no real structure to it like there is to a classroom where you're being given a very set, defined set of information. And so Lynda.com, I consider that it is a complement to in-person education, that it can actually be used as a way to liberate teachers so that they can spend more face-to-face time and higher touch with students, and that it is more about personal learning at your own speed, whatever it is that you need to fill in the gaps with. And it's probably more of a competitor to books than it is to classrooms. Like Moocs, I believe in the Laptop U article, is really being positioned as a alternative to school, or sometimes a threat to school, but rarely is it being described as a complement to in-person education. So that's a pretty big difference between the two of us. So within the article, some of the controversy around Moocs is that a Mooc could be a solution to the overcrowding of schools. That a Mooc potentially could replace teachers, so it potentially is replacing the teacher's jobs. That Moocs potentially threaten a school's business model, because I think before the downturn in the economy, we didn't think so much about education as being a business. But there's, whenever you have a shortage of funds, education is often the first thing to get defunded. And so I think the reality of it is even public universities and public schools still have to worry about their business model when they experience things like a downturn in enrollment or difficulty to access student loans. And so the Moocs, potentially somebody could decide, oh, I'm going to go do a free Mooc instead of paying tuition at Evergreen. So it can threaten the business model. And the article talked about how one of the teachers really felt that by kind of encapsulating and packaging up everything in a Mooc, that this teacher's role was really reduced to something far less important, which was just that of a glorified teaching assistant. And I think the whole issue of credentialing and grades is typically exercised through multiple choice questions. It's very data-driven, difficult for subjective measurement, like let's say you're submitting a paper that you've written. There isn't really a right or a wrong answer that could easily be identified by a machine. So sort of this real dependence on machine learning and sort of machine grading. I think the aspect that the article talked about with memorializing materials, I know from the feedback that we get about Lynda.com, where we've clearly memorialized lectures in the form of videos, that it can free teachers up, it can be liberating so that they have the freedom to spend more time with students or other activities. And that the whole idea of giving a lecture is rote for the teacher as much as it can be for the student. That as I know myself when I taught at Art Center and I didn't have videos to rely on and I was giving the same lecture every semester, that I couldn't wait to get through that part of it so that I could go work on student projects and stuff that was a little bit more creative. And the article talked about how actors and performers record their very best work. So why not teachers? Why not, really do great high production quality of lectures? And then the idea that top schools are really becoming more of a broadcast network than a school. So I look at videos more as as an alternative to reading how to learn something, but by watching and hearing, that it just taps into a few more senses, but that it's very easy to consume it either in a linear manner or in a nonlinear manner, much like you would a book. And so there's been this term that's called the flipped classroom, which is very much the Evergreen model, which is that you do your research at home, but in class, you are actually you're involved in group participation. One of the nice things about videos and books is that your experience while you're watching them or reading them is anonymous. if you have to reread a passage or rewind something and look at it again, or you forget something, nobody's really observing you, whereas in class, if you are participating in a discussion and you kind of get caught not knowing something or not really understanding something, it can be kind of embarrassing. And I think for people who are shy, like I was, I liked the anonymity of my own research at my own kind of speed. The rewinding, the rewatching, the nonlinear, and the fact that it can complement what you do with in-person education. So as far as the whole assessment component of Moocs and online education, where it gets to be a problem is when you have something subjective. I talked about that a little bit already. The idea that how you might grade or how you might evaluate, let's say at Evergreen, a teacher is permitted to say, this student started at this level and they progressed to that level, and that's important. Whereas in a more traditional, more standard framework, it might be, I can't give that student an A because they don't measure up to the other student who gets an A, and everything has to be more standard. So I think that the whole, the entire subject of assessment to me is a very sensitive and tricky one, and I think I'm much more biased towards the Evergreen way, in that I think that the idea of teacher and self-evaluations is much more akin to the real world, where when you're at a job, you're going to get a performance review. I think the skill of being able to be self-critical and really be truthful about how much effort you put into something or what you did well and what you didn't do well is an incredibly valuable skill in the real world. And I also think it's an incredibly valuable skill to learn how to take feedback, and that you don't get that through grades. That's an experience that you're just completely sheltered from. So to me, the idea of grades and multiple choice is so one-dimensional that it's just not really very valuable. And there's also this other aspect of assessment where there's a huge emphasis right now in the whole online ed tech world of data, the idea that everything is data-driven, that we're analyzing the success, how successful is Evergreen based on the graduation percentages, based on the job placement percentages, or how many students completed this Mooc. And we start to look at a lot of data around assessment. And I think that that can be a good and a bad thing. You know, it might inform in terms of one kind of a measurement of how well you're doing, but anytime you analyze data, it just depends on what data, how you're looking at that data. Like I was speaking to Judy, and she was talking about how we have, I think it was Lee Homan this morning, and she was talking about how Evergreen has a 50% graduation rate, while University of Washington has a 67% graduation rate. I think it was 53% to 67%. But what that isn't taking into account is that UW has very high standards, much higher grade point average that you have to have, higher maybe socioeconomic status that you have to have. And so really, if you already have to have this certain grade point average when you're getting in, their success rate should be higher than Evergreen's, because Evergreen is much more inclusive. So sort of how you're looking at the data, it's not black and white. You can say it means one thing when it really doesn't mean that one thing. So there's dangers in that. And the article talked about the two systems of higher ed, about the Ivy Leagues and how they turn so many more people away than those who apply, and they're unable to really keep up with the demand. They're exclusive, they're scarce. And then the majority of people who go to college are educated in community colleges, regional colleges. The article also talked about something called the cost disease, and that is where Harvard still holds the same number of students that it held 100 years ago, but the teachers are paid a lot more than they were 100 years ago without increased efficiency, and how, again, the business model of education isn't really a working business model. It's sort of broken. And also the promise of going to school, that tuitions have increased, and yet the job placement has gone down. So that might all get bundled into this idea of a cost disease. And while the article didn't call it this, I think that there is a real commoditization right now of education. the article talked about how Harvard and Stanford are the Starbucks and Pete's of colleges, and that there is a threat to public universities from for-profit universities. University of Phoenix was mentioned, and we talked about that today in seminar too, so that might come up in the Q&A afterwards. But I think to be very clear that higher ed is a $65 billion industry. And so whether we're looking at for-profit or nonprofit, publicly funded or privately funded schools, there's still that much amount of money at stake. And it's high stakes, and there's sort of a land grab for it. And if any of you are more interested in this particular subject, the privatization of education, I recommend this book called Reign of Error by Diane Ravitch, who actually was one of the policymakers behind No Child Left Behind, and then completely flipped her beliefs about standardized education and standardized testing, and has come out against those things and against school vouchers and the whole idea that we should turn education into private industry. So there's, we talked about big data, the difficulties around interpreting the data. One of the issues that I have with data is that it tells you about the past, but it doesn't necessarily predict the future. And there has to be a qualitative side to innovation. It can't just all be based on the past and on facts and figures. And of course, there's a huge amount of issue around our privacy and our data, and how we're being perhaps labeled from the time we're in grade school that you're bad at math, or you're this or you're that, and how that could follow you around for the rest of your life. It's sort of a scary, really scary idea, the labeling somebody forever. So I think a part of where online education kind of falls apart is that the online discussion boards are really not nearly as either rewarding or effective as having a real group discussion, sort of face-to-face. There's a 90% dropout rate of Moocs, and I think it's partly because people don't really know what they're agreeing to when they sign up for one. They don't really know what the experience is going to be like, but of course that's a bad percentage. And that the whole way that they're being assessed is challenging, which we talked about already, the whole idea that a question within humanities can have so many answers. There's no one right answer. It's more of weighing all the different discussion points. So how do we assess for qualitative? Well, I think Evergreen has the right solution there. And then there's the whole copyright and licensing. This also came up in the article. If a Harvard teacher is teaching a course for Harvard and then moves to Yale, who owns the copyright of that material? I think that's something that's still really getting ironed out. And that these courses potentially outlive the teacher, and that's probably never been possible before. That's sort of a new thing, that could exist. So the job threat that one of the examples given in the article was if Harvard issued courseware that got used by other colleges, let's say that it got used by Evergreen, instead of having an Evergreen faculty member, that it might replace a teacher instead of hiring the teacher, and that that would likely hit the cash-strapped schools more than it would hit the Ivy League schools, because they have the reputation and they have that ability, and that it could cause actually the faculty numbers to dwindle to the point of extinction, to where instead of having choice of who we're going to learn from, it would be very few, to the point to where we would even stop, being a teacher would stop being an appealing profession, which I sadly think is actually already happening, and that fewer and fewer fields would actually be taught, and that's a scary prospect. So we talked a little bit in seminar about this, about the democratization aspect of online education, and that we have, as an actual substitute, that it's certainly inferior, but for people who can't afford the time or the money, that it's a better alternative than not being able to be educated, and that it's great for the lifelong learners who want to continue learning outside of formal education. And as the article called it, it's a victory for open-ended scholarship, just meaning that it's a victory for people who want to learn forever. And so the whole question also in the article, and I think on a lot of people's mind, is, is there really value in the diploma? And often These people are listed as the exemplars of people who didn't complete college yet made huge successes out of themselves. And so some of the key ideas of online learning is this idea of one-to-many, which I experienced when I wrote my first book. They talked in the article about it was like the guru on the mountaintop, the chosen teacher, the broadcast model, not the broadcast model, and the television model, and also this sort of more automated right and wrong answers. So it's sort of this more machine-based learning. So I wanted to share my thoughts before we sort of open up these concepts for discussion today. I think that while it is threatening to jobs, I do think that online education is potentially going to reduce the number of teachers. I don't think that you can turn back time and go back to the days before the internet, that it's here to stay, that there are certain efficiencies that it can provide, and that what I like to think about more is what's better done online and what's better done in person, and can we maximize the two? And if there would be a way to save on costs with faculty, that frankly would probably save education more than spending more than what education can spend on faculty. So it's sort of a delicate thing. Nobody wants, as a faculty member, to think their job is at risk. However, if you don't figure out a way to work within budgets, and they're realistic things, you can't just overspend more than what you have. So if the alternative is to have fewer teachers, and have teachers maybe have a completely different role, which I think is more the role of the Evergreen teacher, which is the facilitator, the cheerleader, the person who helps you through your personal project, your personal objectives, the high-touch human being who supports you and helps you, versus necessarily the sage on the stage, the uber expert in a topic. That could be a way to not replace in-person education, but foster in-person education. I'm always asking this question, what's better done online and in person? To me, grades are meaningless, and I think they're really damaging. I'm in favor of measuring, and I'm in favor of testing as a diagnostic tool to help you realize what it is that you need to learn, not to be punitive and tell you that you're not good at something or you didn't pass something. That is my personal opinion. Obviously, it's not shared by very many other institutions, but it is shared by Evergreen. And I think that soft skills still 100% rule the world. I have, with lynda.com, this year we will be 700 employees. And while I don't interview every single job applicant, I've interviewed hundreds of people over the last 20 years as I've been building lynda.com. And while, yes, I'm looking for somebody with subject expertise, I'm equally, if not more, looking for somebody who can learn new skills, who can adapt, who can sit at the table and have a good conversation, who can challenge other people's ideas, who can adapt when things change, who can be willing to put themselves and their ideas on the line. And so I think that your Evergreen education is going to get you far, not for what you're going to learn today, but for how you are learning to learn. And that is the experience that I had, and I didn't know that I even had it when I was here, to be honest with you, because I wasn't all that successful of a student. I think no one could have picked me out of the crowd as the person who was going to lead the multi-hundred-million-dollar business someday when she grew up. I was definitely a very shy person, and I was still struggling to find myself, but I was given the encouragement to believe that I could, and to me that was the more powerful thing. And so that is the end of my talk, and I'd love to take some questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. You talked about how sometimes school can be a little bit damaging in that it puts like sort of success or failure on you forever. Like you have an F on your permanent record and you can never get anywhere. But do you think that online and non-traditional education is going to have to start doing some of the same thing in order to be perceived as legitimate by sort of the whole community?
I mean, you raised a really good question. Do I need to repeat the question? Could everybody hear it?
I'm sorry.
Did people hear the question? Just say no. Okay, so her question was that do online and sort of these new alternatives for learning need to embrace grades to be more, considered to be more valid by employers, right? Employers is really who you're thinking that it will matter to. I think that we do have a long way to come. Google is kind of leading the way in that they've publicized that they no longer look at your grade point average or what college you graduated from, and that they are looking more for people who can think critically, who can enter into a group discussion and get the sort of credibility or get the respect of the peers who are interviewing them, and that they are valuing these soft skills more than they are your actual pedigree or your degree. I think that it is a long way to come, and part of it is because grades and standardized education, it's kind of a factory model. It's an industrialized model. It's very easy to say that's our system. This is how we're going to judge everybody, and it's much harder to say write a self-evaluation and an evaluation. I mean, the way that Evergreen does it, it's a very much more labor-intensive way to do it. I know for us and for a lot of progressive companies, more progressive companies, that we're looking for people who can think. We're looking for people who can collaborate. We're looking for people who have fresh ideas and are adaptable and willing to learn new things. Clearly, the wave of business is really turning into more of a knowledge economy. I'd like to believe that that is not how online is going to prove its value, but I'm probably an idealist. The truth of the matter is that I think it still matters to a lot of people.
Also, if I can tag like a second question on the end, do you think online education is going to adopt any of the sort of spirit boosting, identity building, and money making aspects of in the classroom education, like teams, like a World of Warcraft team or something like that?
Yes, I mean, I think the question is online education adopting anything from gaming. So some of the rewards that you might get where you're identified as, you've logged more hours or you're better at shooting this type of villain. I don't know what it is, but yes, there are some online education companies. It's called gamification that subscribe to that, and we've actually had some internal lobbyists at Lynda.com to do that, and I've probably resisted it. My reasons for resisting it are because I like the idea that Lynda.com is a flexible learning environment, and that the person who's coming to get the answer to a question is no much less valuable than the person who wants to complete something or spend a lot of time on it. And so I probably have the more idealized view of that, but I do think, especially for kids, like Khan Academy, I don't know how many of you have ever gone onto Khan Academy or heard of it, but they have a lot of these sort of rewards, like if you log on a certain number of times, you get a badge. And because I think they have a younger demographic, I've heard that that's very motivating to a lot of the kids who use it. I think I'm probably spoiled because what Evergreen taught me is that the best motivation in the world is self-motivation. And really, to me, that's the goal, that you want to be motivated yourself. And if you're looking for external motivation all the time, you might not always get it. So then you won't, achieve things and get to do things. So I'm a little bit less directed that way. Yes, in the back.
With the recent decision by the FCC to allow Comcast and Verizon to institute a tiered internet service, do you think this poses any kind of threat to online education?
I think it poses a threat to all online activities. Yes, I do. Of course. Yeah, and it's, net neutrality is not completely decided at this point, and so protest it, right? It's bad. Yes?
Two-part.
Yes.
How do you feel about someone downloading content from Lynda.com illegally? And is there anything you would change about current copyright laws?
Two really good questions. Do I have any concerns about people downloading Lynda.com, pirating Lynda.com basically? And the thing where I feel it really crosses the line is sometimes people download it and then they resell it. And I know that we're on a lot of the pirate boards, and I don't know that there's any way that I could personally ever hope to stop that. And fortunately, there are enough people who are willing to pay an affordable price and they find value in it that we have a working business model, so it's not threatening to our business model particularly. And so I think where I really draw the line is when somebody, which they do, like we actually found a site where they had stolen our whole website, including the names of all the instructors, and they were charging a subscription, and all they'd done was stolen our site. I mean, they had done nothing to build this content and material. So to me, that's a little bit more egregious. And then your second question was?
Would you change anything about current copyright?
Oh yes, would I change anything about current copyright laws? I mean, I don't know a lot about copyright law, to be honest. I'm a little bit out of my league, but I don't know how many of you are aware of Creative Commons. Creative Commons is sort of a really great construct for getting around or making a type of copyright where other people can, with permission, use your materials and iterate with your materials, and sort of, instead of it being stolen, it's with permission that people can take it and use it and change it. And I think that that is a really great sort of system, and I admire that the people who developed it came up with it, and I think it's used by a lot of artists and musicians, and that that's great. As far as copyright law, I mean, there's just horrible stuff that's going on with people just going into patent wars and copyright wars, and you know, the reality is, in truth, that we all stand on each other's shoulders. And you know, there's one thing where you're stealing someone else's work and you're selling it. Okay, to me, that's really a crime, versus you got inspired by something that somebody did and you iterate on it, or you incorporate it into your own work. So it's a delicate subject. I'm certainly not an expert, and I don't even know if I answered your question, but those are my thoughts about it. Yes.
A couple of slides back, we saw that there was some controversy about the Mooc.
Mm-hmm.
There were teachers that were concerned that their role was being relegated to nothing more than teaching assistant. As a teacher, what are your opinions on that? Because I think that that's good. Because I feel that the onus of learning is on the student.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a role that they should be embracing. You're the teacher, so what do you think of that?
Okay, I love that question. For those of you that couldn't hear it, is what do I think of the glorified teaching assistant comment? And the student here is saying that he actually agrees that that's a good role for a teacher. And what do I think about it? And I actually have to agree with you. I think that the old days of a teacher getting up on stage, knowing everything, everyone listening, everyone regurgitating what that teacher knows, that those days are over. I think that the Evergreen model, which I don't think is a glorified teaching assistant at all, I think it's takes an incredible amount of knowledge to be able to field questions from a lot of perspectives. And when you have, you know, a class of 30 or 40 people and they're all wanting to do something different, it's tremendous pressure on you to be able to feel like you're giving every one of those students the value that they deserve. And sometimes you have to say, I don't know the answer. Like I just said, I don't know about copyright law that much. That's not my area. And I think it is, to a student, to see that the teacher is learning along with the student is really powerful. And also that the teacher is not all-knowing, that no one is all-knowing. I think those are really powerful models. So I would like to see the role of teacher change, but it's hard. I mean, those of you who go to school here, I would wager a guess from my own experience that the first year you spent here was a little bit challenging, because it was just such a shift from the way that you'd been taught to learn and taught to be, that you just weren't sure if you were succeeding or failing or what you were doing. And at lunch today, I was sitting with two brand new faculty members, and they were saying it was so much harder to teach her than they ever imagined, because I think that, you know, you have this idea that you're going to be a really good teacher and everybody's going to kind of come along with you, and they're all going to, you're going to know that they're all learning and they're all getting something out of it, and that isn't always the case. And I was trying to reassure them to say, look, if I was your student right now, I wouldn't be getting out of it what you thought I should be getting out of it. I'm just sure of that. And yet I turned out okay. And I think that that is, you know, something that I really hope you'll all take with you today. That I think there's so much pressure that this diploma has to equal getting a job, and that there's so much pressure that, you know, your I'm sure, put on by your parents, put on by your own need to earn money. I mean, there are all kinds of life pressures. But I really could tell you from, you know, being 60 years on this planet and 40 years out of formal education, that you have to invent it as you go along once you're out of school. And if you know how to do that, you're far ahead of everybody else. So that's actually really valuable. And you're learning how to do that here. And that's better than having the grade, or maybe even doing exactly what the teacher wants you to learn or get out of something. That's actually a bigger, higher level achievement. Other questions? Yes?
So, are you familiar with the term future shock?
What's it called? Future shock?
Yeah, future shock.
No.
Okay, so it's the idea of technological development progressing at a rate faster than people can adapt to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people would agree that that's the state of the world in now. There's more stuff being developed than we ever hope to actually get used to using. So what do you think it means to be a lifelong learner in this world of rampant technological development?
I think to be a lifelong learner in this world of fast-paced technological development, it's a contextual problem. If I want to be a technologist, then I've got to keep up with whatever technology I'm going to focus on. If I want to weave baskets, or I want to go to Africa and, you know, teach children music, or, you know, that's not going to be my problem. So I think that the problem is a technological, it's a contextual problem. And I think part of what we tend to do, even in this article, is we tend to kind of make gross generalizations about things. And we also tend to think that things are black and white. And they're really not, and all of us are different. Every one of us has a different aptitude. Every one of us has a different purpose. Every one of us has a different set of interests, a different way of learning. And we can't all aspire to be the same thing, keep up with the same things, and that's perfectly okay. But you know, we have to convince the rest of the world that that's perfectly okay, because there's definitely in this educational industrial complex that we're in a huge emphasis on standardization, a huge emphasis on testing, and in the job market a huge emphasis on degrees and these things. And so I know they're not what's important. I assure you that they're not. But that's definitely the road less traveled, and in some ways it's your advantage that you know that and others don't, because it's the truth. Yeah.
Has Lynda.com ever been like approached by the government to create like something for them, or like standardization? And when you guys work with proprietary stuff, do you ever like write in the back end of the contract like, oh, and then in 10 years from now we can release it to the public? Or
Really good question. Has Lynda.com ever been asked to produce something specific for the government or another organization? And if we are making something proprietary, do we write it into our contracts? And that's been something that we've actually never done. And we've had a lot of pressure to do it. I would say the number one request that we've gotten from industry that we haven't addressed is to do custom content. And the reason why we haven't is because we're trying to build a library that has value to the most possible people. And while I think there is a huge market, and there's a market opportunity for someone else to go out there and do instructional design for companies and do, you know, custom work for companies and government and all that, because we're a subscription service, and, you know, we sort of think of ourselves, if you think about HBO, let's say, when The Sopranos went off the air, if they didn't replace it with Game of Thrones or something else, like, nobody would want to subscribe to it. And so we're a subscription service. We have to make sure that we're helping the majority of people and that they all, you know, are still finding value in it. So that's just been our particular ethos, that we haven't done custom work for people, so it hasn't been an issue. Good question. It does get asked a lot of us. Yes?
So one thing that I thought of was to move into this age. I'm sorry, that's jumbled. To move into this age of internet education, do you have any concerns or thoughts towards the alienation of humanity? You know, people interacting less as a whole.
I really do. I think that it's not enough to just learn online and be online and live your whole life online, and a lot of people do. I think that you're at a tremendous disadvantage when it comes to getting a job and being employable and also being a contributor to the world, because it's actually been proven that when you're in person with somebody else versus seeing them on a screen, even seeing them on a screen, it's better to see, like do a Skype or a WebEx or something and actually see somebody and hear somebody. But when you actually are in person, there's like a hormonal difference with the amount of oxytocin you produce, just all kinds of hormones that we produce when we're actually next to each other and with each other that are, unless we're going to all live in terminals and never interact with each other, we need those skills, and we need to, the better we are at them, I think, the better we are at any job. I mean, I'll tell you, I would rather hire a programmer who can still explain things to me and share ideas well and communicate, being such an important skill, not just the programming skills. So I do think that it's a problem, and it's especially a problem, I think, for younger people, because I think just learning how to manage your virtual life versus your real life it's almost like I just saw the movie Fed Up about sugar. And it's like an addiction, you know. We all know it, checking our phones constantly, or checking our Facebook or whatever it might be. And so when you're older, you have the ability to build the discipline to schedule that and not be addicted to it. But I think especially for kids, K through 12, it's really hard for them to establish those boundaries. So I think it's a big problem, and it's probably going to get bigger. Yes.
So you mentioned the Forbes, and you said yourself today about the importance of soft skills in the world. So as a major employer, I think, how do you get at that when you're hiring someone? How do you know that they have those skills? How do they know that at Lynda.com, I guess is what I'm asking.
It's a great question, and I don't know that we have any kind of formula, but one of the things that I like to do is ask open-ended questions and just sort of observe how someone reacts to my question. I'm also judging their body language. I'm judging, can they look me in the eye? I mean, especially, I have a particularly strange problem because I'm the founder, and it's got my namesake, so people are intimidated by me, especially, I typically at this point I'm only interviewing senior executives, but I have to know that they can stand up to me. It's really important to me that they're not just gonna be mowed over by my, whatever importance. And so I'm judging a lot of sort of unspoken cues. Are they looking me in the eye? Is their voice, shaking? Are they willing to say things that I might not agree with? Are they just answering how they think I want them to answer? Are they being authentic? I'm looking at that. But I don't have any kind of, bottled just process that I do. And I think for different departments it would be, and different jobs, it would be different. If you're a video editor, let's say at Lynda.com, we would probably want you to be able to sit for long hours by yourself in front of your computer screen, right? That would probably be considered a real benefit. If you're really chatty and a little too social, could be a problem. So I think it's all contextual, right? Yeah. Yes?
I was just curious where you feel that, are you familiar with like Canvas?
The software? Oh.
Well, it's like a learning platform
Yeah.
that teachers use.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I mean, I know what it is, but I've never used it.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just curious how you felt where that.
Like
fits
learning
in.
management software? What I feel
I
about it?
don't know how to explain Canvas. That's terrible.
That's what it's called, learning management.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's a way to distribute multiple sources, like Lynda.com could be in there and other vendors, and it's sort of a way that you could both distribute education and also, consume it and find it, right?
Right.
That's
and
what
you
it
can
is.
submit to your professor assignments
Okay.
and things, and then receive grades and.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was just wondering where you felt like that fit on the online learning scheme, and if you want to bypass that, I was also curious. I feel like online
Yes.
And if you could talk about the dangers of that a little bit more.
Okay, well, those are the first question's less probably involved, but the first question is just how do I feel about learning management systems, and I think, well, you know already that I don't agree with grading as a teaching modality or as being something of great value to anybody. So the fact that it's partially a vehicle for teachers to keep track of grades is not particularly appealing to me, but I think having software that helps manage a lot of disparate information streams is really helpful to teachers and to students. And so I think the overarching concept of it is pretty good. Except for the grading part, except for the fact that it's kind of it's a standard. It's another sort of set of standards in a way, but the fact that you can manage your homework, have a really centralized place where you can talk to your other fellow students, to your teachers, I think there's a lot of good in it too. And then your other question, which I just remembered and then just forgot, which was harder, as I recall.
Yeah, it was about.
Oh yeah, how online is really makes the privatization of education a lot easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it in my slides. I just don't think there's any way to turn back the clock. I mean, you can say that, yes, online has caused our economy to lose a ton of jobs in a ton of industries because it makes certain efficiencies that replace people. That being true, I don't think anybody's gonna go back on it and go, oh, let's just forget we ever had it and hire everybody back to manufacture and do all these things. You know, so to me, it's a force that can't be changed. So I don't fault it for the privatization of education, but I think that there is a reality, whether you are for-profit or a public institution, that wherever the money comes from, it's still money, it's still a business model. There's tons of money and tons of corruption within public education, even though it's funded by the government. And I think that in reality, free anything is a myth. There really is no such thing as free. You know, if Facebook is free, but what's being sold? All your private information is what's being sold. There has to be a business model or else you can't pay people. You can't sustain without a business model. It will not work. So while I think I wouldn't, you know, blame online as what's causing it, I would blame the economic forces, some of the political forces that undervalue the, you know, I think there are different, obviously, political sides that believe certain things should be run on their own business model and other things should be subsidized. And so that's more of a political belief system. But I think the reality is, regardless of your belief system, that there is money and that it is a business model. So I don't know if that totally answers your question. But
Yeah.
Yes.
This is just maybe like an afterthought to why it could be an advantage to seeking out private contract workers. So you're accessing a workforce here and you're educating them. As a workforce, one of those things they do is they go to corporate websites and they apply. And in that application process, that is like they're in front of the computer then and there. If Lynda.com had developed something, be like, it's the GE application class.
Yeah.
So not only are you becoming aware of what the current business mantra is,
Sure.
but you're also educating this person. And so
I mean, I
if
think
they
that there's
don't-
I get your point completely, and let me repeat it for those who could not hear him, that if Lynda.com were to subscribe to sort of credentialing, that it could actually really help people get jobs and that it would be a positive thing. And we actually teamed up with LinkedIn, and we have a way to authenticate and show on your LinkedIn profile if you completed a course on Lynda.com. But where I have a personal issue with it is, I think to me the thing I'm most proud about Lynda.com is that it's a flexible learning environment, and that while you might have taken a single course and completed it, I might have watched 3 movies from one course and 5 movies from another and 7 from another and gotten a project done that I'm really proud of, that I can show in my portfolio, that is more, you know, powerful to what I was trying to do than the fact that I finished this other thing. So I think it's probably idealistic a little bit on my part, and my roots in alternative education are certainly showing in that bias that I'm really kind of protecting the flexibility of it versus the marketability of it. But I personally just believe in portfolios and demonstrating what you can do, not showing what you've taken and not showing what grades you've gotten in things. That's just more how I'm oriented. Yes?
So you are taking sort of the true believer side of it, but you know there's other businesses out there, and do you think any of them are pushing the marketability, like will credential you and these credentials will sell?
Oh, sure. We have tons of competitors who are credentialing and tons of them that are doing certification programs. And there's a huge industry. It's a huge money-making idea. You know,
I think at some point that's just going to become inevitable and everyone's going to be credentialed online.
I would like, I mean, I would like to believe not, but I might be wrong. You know, I'm willing to agree that, you know, we're a very data-driven world and everybody wants sort of the quick, instant gratification. Does this person check the box? Doesn't that person check the box? And I know that's the world that we live in, but it's just not the truth to me.
What would Lynda.com do at that point?
What would we do if we were to do it?
What would you do if it was the point where it was like credentialing is the way that everyone's doing it? What is Lynda.com going to do?
I don't think I mean, we've been doing this for almost 20 years and that has not been a barrier to our success. So I don't really think that there would, unless suddenly the government like cracks down and says only credentialed online education, you know, materials can be purchased. That could happen. I mean, that's sort of the scary world that we're living in. Because there is a lot of political, real sort of direction behind this idea of standardization and, you know, raising the scores of us as a country. And there's just like a huge movement in that direction. And so part of what I would love to do is to be able to share with more people the Evergreen way and be more articulate that these are valuable, that it's valuable to think differently about this idea of grades and certificates and credentialing. And I may not win, but I think it's a fight worth fighting. And I think so far we're proof that it does work. So, yes?
So what about LinkedIn's system about endorsing skills? It would allow for more personalization. You would have, people would need reputations that they could certify them, knowing from their phase. So you could do a mashup of projects requiring many different courses, but then you have someone with high reputation who said, oh, I did this project and I thought it was good.
Yeah, I think that what LinkedIn has done is really great. What I tried to convince them to do was to not just look at completion as the only way that you could put the credential on your LinkedIn profile, because I think that the notion of completion is much more slanted towards completing a specific course versus your own learning objective. And that's just my personal issue with it, but I think that employers do look at all kinds of things that you do extracurricular. And you can show, you know, you could say, I did this, I learned it on lynda.com, I learned it on Khan Academy, I learned it wherever. And, you know, nobody is really stopping you. And I just don't know that by saying, I think one of the reasons why we're even having this whole discussion about the skills gap and the whole beginning of my presentation is because there's this false promise that this diploma means you're employable. That because you've got a grade, that it means that you'll be successful. And it is not the truth. And so I would love to make that, shine a light on that versus just obliged by sort of the mainstream belief system that, you know, show the credential and show the grade and get the diploma and have the diploma mean something and, you know, have it be really expensive or have it be certified by Microsoft or whatever thing that it is, because I just don't really believe in it. So that's just my bias. And there are people at lynda.com who disagree with me. And even people in this audience, I'm sure, as some of you have expressed. Yes?
So I was wondering, you talked a lot about how you've stuck by your ideals or how they've guided you. And I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and kind of what sort of, it sounds like you bring some mindfulness with you to what you're doing business-wise or career-wise. I was just wondering how you guide yourself with that and what your process is roof over your head and, you know, feeding your husband and kids.
No, it's great. I mean, I think I've been incredibly fortunate, and I'm not alone. Like, if you look at Khan Academy, they did not come out of standardized education. They were not government funded. They didn't come out of Harvard. You know, that was an outlier person who was teaching his niece math and realized that tons of people were subscribing to his YouTube channel and realized that there was a huge, you know, market for what he was doing beyond what he thought he was doing. I think that we've been able to be innovative partly because it's worked. Had it not paid the bills, had no one come, had no one subscribed, I wouldn't have been able to stick to those ideals within this particular framework. You know, maybe I would have stuck to them by writing books the way I want to write them, or by, you know, being a classroom teacher the way that I like to teach. But you do have to be realistic about how you're going to earn a living, and I've always been realistic about that. So I'm just standing here saying it's been a huge success to not give credentials and not give grades. And I think it's proof, just like Evergreen is proof, that that's not how everybody learns, and that isn't, you know, what makes a good, there's a difference between education and learning. And education is the formal construct that we think we know to impart knowledge, and learning is whether you actually do learn or you don't learn. And I think the proof has been that people have learned. And, you know, we hear it on a daily basis, and people stay subscribed and they pay for it, and to me that's proof. So, good question, yes.
Buddy, and I'm not a student, I'm here visiting, but I'm train of thought, just if I could throw something out as I was listening to you in these last questions. Sorry, my little
I can hear you.
demo. There is this current sort of hierarchy of, you know, the credentials and the thing, and that's the way many of those are the corporate things. Listening to you, the sort of hope, sort of, yes, maybe, is that people like what you're doing and others are potentially, and this is maybe going off on a long whistle, but literally the branching of a potential other line of evolution for humanity, human beings, and how we can communicate and propagate, and might be in the long term more viable. Where this whole line of only technology and this sort of quantification could be self-limiting. Whereas the sort of heart element of what you seem to be doing is that it's not limiting. It's, does that make any sense?
I think so. I mean, I think what you're saying is if more people knew that they could follow their heart, find what they were really put on earth to do, be happy, be employed, make enough money, you know, would that change sort of the course of evolution? Would it change humanity? And of course it would, you know, for the better, I think. And I know, I mean, I'm not the only person who's done this. There are lots of people who follow their heart and, you know, have a lot of, you know, integrity with how they have run their businesses. And so I would hope that more people would know how to do it, but I think part of it is, you know, we're all being fed a lie that if you conform and if you get the degree and you do it this way that you'll be successful, and it's a lie because look, it's not working. So yeah, so I think just standing up, being counted, I think it's really important to give talks. I think it's really important to, you know, be proud of the Evergreen way, the background, and to, especially in ed tech, because there's a whole side of it that's extremely scary. That's a lot about privatization and vouchers and measurements and standards and raising the rankings. And I think it's really important that I, as a spokesperson for my industry, stand up for this other way. And so that's what I'm doing here and what I need to amplify and want to amplify. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just wondering about, you had been a leading figure in a field, an early field,
I mean, I was definitely one of the few women in special effects and also one of the few women in computer graphics when I first started. And my strategy was that that was actually an advantage because, you know, you kind of stand out if you're different. And I do think that I felt like I had to prove my credibility differently than my male counterparts, in that it was assumed that I didn't know as much as they did, and so I had to do a little bit more proving. But I took that as just a challenge to myself, and I was able to do it. And I actually think that, especially because I chose to be a teacher, there are a lot of women teachers. It's not like I am a computer scientist where there are very few women. So for me, I just always tried to ignore the obstacles and just soldiered on, you know, just sort of did what I needed to do to be as good at what I did as I could, and almost was in denial that there was a problem. And so I think, yeah, for sure, I mean, every woman's experienced sexism and obstacles, but I just haven't let them get in the way.